Thank you for tuning into the Devy Devotional Podcast, a monthly show focusing on Devy prospects, strategies, and incoming rookies. Now here's your host.
Welcome back to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A. As always, I am joined by Aaron Wilcox, and tonight we're going to be covering the 2025 draft class, the 25 running backs, I should say. Unfortunately, I had to cut time off because I have another pod to join a little bit later, but we're going to split into two pods. We're going to do the running backs tonight, and then we're going to do the QBs and the wide receivers another night, probably in 2 weeks, unless I can convince Aaron to do it a little sooner. But speaking of Aaron, how are you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing well. You know how we all get excited for incoming rookies into the NFL? Well, that's how I sometimes get about these incoming freshmen. So very excited for tonight. Happy to be back with you.
Absolutely. I think, like you said, it's very exciting. We get excited about rookies in our rookie drafts and Dynasty, and because we think that we can take advantage of values. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're trying to project these players and see if we can take advantage of values, because right now you can get them very late or very cheap or whatever it may be. And if you are in early, then you're going to be able to bank on that, and then you can turn that, whether it's C2C, Devy, or whatever it may be, you're able to turn that into the NFL side, and then obviously score a bunch of points, win a lot of shifts. So that is our goal tonight. That's why we are talking about 2025. Whether you are a Devy player or not, I still think it's important. We just talked about it last time with the 2024 class, how we're starting to get into trading for those picks. And maybe we're not quite there with the 2025 class yet, but it's not going to be that long before we start thinking about it. And, you might even have some people in your leagues already starting to say, hey, why don't you throw me that 2025 draft pick and things like that. So it's always good to have an idea of what's going on. But let's go ahead and dive right in. I believe there is a clear-cut number one here. I don't know how you feel about the top tier, if it's a one-player tier or multiple players here, but I have one in my tier one. How do you feel about that?
I'm fine with it. That seems on point with what the community has as a somewhat of a consensus right now, but I wouldn't say everybody has just the one guy. But go ahead and give us your number one here, John.
So the reason why I have Nicholas Singleton as my own, my clear-cut number one is there's no one else. Like he is going to be the starter for Penn State, and so I think it's just he's a top tier guy, 5-star running back, 6 foot 210, like quality size, and no one in front of him. So he's going to start right away. We're excited about a QB that we'll talk about on the next show. I think the offense can grow because I feel like the offense has been hindered a little bit by the QB play. And so even though as much as I love Jahan Dotson and even getting in some of the other players, I believe that the offense can grow and get better. And that's why when you start talking about that kind of stuff, then it really makes sense why Singleton would be the number one. The only question I really have about him, and you can talk about whether you have the same fears or whatever, is I'm not 100% sure that he's a true pass catcher or like a great receiver. And I mean, obviously he's a 5-star back, so maybe I'm wrong about that, but I don't know that he really has that part in his high school game, that I was looking at. And so it could be something that they bring out of him, but I don't know that I actually saw it in high school.
Yes, and that's a very valid concern. And I also share that opinion, though there are reports out there as people who say that he can catch the ball well. And just because he hasn't, I suppose we can't rule him out as being a competent pass catcher. But I do see that in his film that he's kind of a limited player, insanely athletic. So, I mean, you love that. And he dominated in high school. It was a lower level of competition, so he should a guy of his athleticism should be dominating for sure. But at the end of the day, the guy has athleticism, the size adjusted athleticism that is similar to maybe a Jonathan Taylor. And that's going to stick out to NFL teams. And, that Penn State can pump out NFL caliber running backs. Like you said, competition wise, they're not the greatest right now. I will caution people. I mean, they have another incoming freshman who is pretty well ranked in this class. I don't really love him, but who knows what the Penn State staff is going to think. Maybe they'll split time a little bit more than what we anticipate. But I mean, Singleton is the superior athlete. He needs to develop. I mean, he's a guy who they just tossed him the ball and he was going out there on sweeps, on, outside runs. I don't want to say like every highlight was that, but it's like 90% of his highlights. They're just all these outside runs, and he needs to figure out how to run inside. And I think he'll be able to do that. I'm not counting him out by any means. He is my running back one in this class, but I have a couple of other guys I'm comfortable having in the same tier as him. So that's just one difference that I have compared to some in the community, I guess.
Yeah, and I think everything that you said, and like I said, he doesn't necessarily have that passing or the receiving part to the game 100% there, and so it all makes sense. But I think the fact that he's the clear-cut guy, I mean, maybe like you said, maybe there's another guy, like maybe he's not the clear-cut guy. I think he is, but I think the next two players that maybe you would have in the same tier, I don't think have a shot at being the starter. Maybe one of them does, or maybe it could be a little bit later on in the season, that kind of thing. And that's why I feel like Singleton is going to start day one, and then the other guys probably aren't, and that's kind of why I feel the way I feel about having him there in the tier one. It's probably nitpicking more than anything else, but I do have him as my RB1. But who do you have as your RB2 there, and do you have him in the same tier? Or are you separating a tier there?
Yeah, so I mean, you outlined some great reasons for why he has the weakest competition to beat out amongst any of these top running backs. And Branson Robinson is who I have at number 2, Georgia. And I actually had him number 1 for a little while there, but I've thought about it more and more, and it's like Singleton has the edge as far as like top end speed. He has the edge competition wise, and as much as Georgia has traditionally put out really great backs, it seems like a lot of us in the Devy C2C community maybe are forgetting, I guess, about how many great running backs have come out, because lately we have Zamir White and James Cook, and we're not super excited about those guys, but traditionally Georgia's an amazing running back landing spot. So I am all aboard the Branson Robinson train. I mean, this guy in high school, either as a sophomore or junior, he was just jacked, and he's a 4.4 guy. He hit 20.5 miles per hour in high school. He's got a 40-inch vert, and he's doing all that at 220 pounds. And he also shows that lateral agility and some of that elusiveness that we want to see. I mean, he's not just this plodding back who just relies on athleticism and just being bigger than his high school competition. So he's a very good recruit in this class. I'm very high on him being able to wrestle that job, or at least a significant role year one. And that may be why I have him in the same tier as Singleton. But yeah, I think he's super talented, and I'm excited about him this year.
Yeah, and I have the next two guys basically tied. So I technically put Jaden Blue over him, but honestly, I fought back and forth. I went back and forth like multiple times on it, so I really can't blame you either way. It's really tough. Honestly, it's very tough. I think I probably should go off what I was saying with Singleton. I think Branson will start before Jaden will, and so if that's the case, then why wouldn't I have him at 2? And so I'm like kind of changing my rank as I'm thinking about it right now. But my only concern was just from looking at the stats. You know me, I don't do film. Strictly looking at the stats, I saw he was a 4.49 player, and I didn't truly believe it. Now, you've watched the film. I don't know if you... I mean, it sounded like you did. Like you believed the athleticism was there. I believe the burst is there. I believe, you see the vertical. He squats 620 pounds. Like, the dude's a freaking beast. I believe the burst is there. I don't know if the top-end speed is there. And that's where I wonder a little bit about Branson. And once again, this is strictly from looking at the stats. I could be very wrong. They're high school stats. But I love everything about him. Size, like, he has everything you want in a workhorse back. He does not have much of a receiving profile. And in fact, I'd really say the top 3 guys don't have much of a receiving profile, honestly. And so you're kind of nitpicking between the 3 because none of them really have that, but they kind of all have that explosive nature to the game or whatever. But going back to the question, do you really truly believe he is a 4.49 guy, or do you think, especially if he starts adding a little bit of weight, that maybe he'll slow down a little bit?
Yeah, at this rate, I don't really see him having to add weight since his body's already so well developed. So he's already at 220. If he gains 5 pounds, I'm sure he'll be able to match that with some of the training that these collegiate athletes have access to. So as he further develops into that body, I'm not really concerned about him being slower than a 4.58. I mean, like in the lower 4.5s. So I don't think he's a 4.6 guy. I don't think he's sluggish at all. I think that your concerns, or at least expectations in the 4.4s, I mean, I don't think that we should expect that out of him. Like you said, it's not like he was ripping off huge plays every single time he had the ball in his hand, but he does have the burst, and that's a little bit more important to me. And we've seen that in the NFL is having the burst. At least you're explosive
Yep.
versus always having the home run speed. A lot of the top guys don't necessarily have that. So I think that that's a good reason just to have him behind Singleton, that's for sure. And I can transition into Blue if you'd like, because he's my RB3 in this class. I do think it's somewhat close with Robinson there. And those who are just going to go off of star rankings are going to be like, well, Jaden Blue's not even like the number 2, number 3 running back in this class based on the recruiting services. And that's just because he sat out his senior high school season. I mean, he had
Yeah.
insane sophomore, junior production in Texas, and he just fell down. He was ranked as the RB1 in the class, and then he fell down because he just didn't play. He opted to sit out. It was his option, probably works in his favor. He knew that he was set at Texas. He's going to be the heir apparent to Bijan, though they do have a talented running back room. So to assume that he's going to be maybe the level of player Bijan is as far as commanding share of the offense, I'm not sure if we can exactly expect that for Blue, but that Texas team should be potent. And I think that Blue has pretty good speed. He's hit 21 miles per hour in high school. And I don't think he's going to be a 4.4 guy either, though. I think he's going to be in the 4.5s.
Really?
If I'm being honest, he got caught behind a lot in high school. But one of the things with that is, was he really trying? Was he letting up at the end because he knew
Yeah.
he had the touchdown? And I think that happened. But no, he doesn't flash that crazy speed, though he was a great producer. So he's a smooth player. He's pretty bursty, and he's got just a lot of the skills you want to see from a running back. And Jalen Blue, I mean, he might be in the role of Javonte Williams, Dobbins, Josh Jacobs, Brees Hall. Some of these guys who are really quite good. Maybe not truly these elite talents, athleticism wise. They're not Saquon Barkley's, guys like that, but he still could be an excellent running back.
Yeah, like I said, I've gone back and forth on the two. I think you've kind of convinced me here to move Branson ahead of him, especially being that you've watched the film and you do believe he has the speed. That was my biggest question with Branson was, does he have that speed? Like I said, the receiving abilities are kind of a secondary thing, but it's exactly the same thing with Jaden. I don't think he had. I guess he had a little bit more of a receiving game, I believe, than Branson did, and so maybe that's why I ended up putting him ahead there. I think when you're looking at the stats, differentiating between burst and speed can be difficult sometimes, and I don't even know that I truly care which one he has, because I do believe he has that burst at the very least that can get you. Look at an Alvin Kamara, look at a Javonte Williams. They're not fast guys, yet they have insane, or maybe not insane, but they have very good burst, and they're able to get big chunk plays because of that. That could be a Jaden Blue thing. Maybe he's running a 4.5, but maybe he has an insane amount of burst, and he's able to go get you a 25-yard play on the regular, and that's why I saw maybe a little more excitement. I love to use the exciting phrase there. I saw a little more excitement with Jaden Blue, and that's why I ended up putting him over there. But it's really hard not to love Princeton Robinson. It really is.
Yeah, it's just 2A, 2B type of deal. They're so good. So both of them are very skilled players, and I think Jaden Blue is a wonderfully well-rounded. athlete and running back. He's very nuanced at the position, and there's no doubt in my mind that he deserves to be a top 3 back in this class, based on our rankings at this point.
Yeah, and that was the end of the tier for me. So I guess I believe that you had them kind of all in tier 1. I had it split into tier 1 for Singleton and then tier 2 for those two. And then getting into tier 3, I have 2 more players. What about you? How many you have in tier 3 there?
So I have an additional 4 players.
Ooh.
I think I had 5 just until maybe a week or so ago. So yeah, I'm interested to see who you're liking here, John.
All right, so we'll jump right in. Jamarian Miller out of Alabama is my next player. 4-star prospect, 5'10", 195, a little small, but I think, I know you've talked in the past about, you easily believe somebody, especially like 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot, whatever, can add 15 pounds. Like that's a reasonable expectation out of players. And so if he's 195, we can see a 5'10", 210. That's a pretty good size. Maybe it's not like true workhorse size that we're looking for, but it's good enough. It's not a James Cook. It's not a player like that. So add in Alabama. Add in, he's probably the best receiving back in this class, honestly. Just dude is a receiver. Like he might actually. I think they're actually talking about possibly playing him at receiver a little bit this year for Alabama. So the other thing is he might actually be the fastest player, at least of the players that we've talked about so far. And so I think you add all that together with Alabama, and next thing you know, he's my RB4. Now, like I said, he's a teardrop below. We know Gibbs is there. There's some other players there. I think they had a transfer come in. He's not guaranteed anything, especially year 1. It's Alabama. There's the pros and the cons with Alabama. So I think while I love the player, I love the prospects of the player. That doesn't mean he's going to gain value or do anything like that this year. And so that's why I dropped him down to tier 4 for that reason.
It can take 2, 3, 4 years sometimes for these Alabama backs to truly break out. So that's valid. I also have him in this tier, so I'll talk about him for sure. And I do think that his weight has been updated to 201 pounds. So that's a little bit even more promising. But yeah, like you said, he's a great producer from high school, and he was a great receiving back. I would say, yeah, I guess I won't go too in depth about like how he earned his receptions. Just saying like he's not necessarily this wide receiver guy who's lining up outside all the time. I mean, he's very capable of being a receiving back. It's just not necessarily like the game breaking ability there. But again, he's competent, and he's also very competent as an inside runner too. He's a no nonsense guy. He can run through an arm tackle. He can get around a guy with a nice move or a cut, and he can transition into being a downhill runner and churn out some yards. So I don't have too many concerns with him. His athleticism is good. He hit 21 miles per hour. He ran a 4.4 in high school. He had a good 100-yard dash time. So his athleticism kind of checks those boxes. I don't think he's quite the athlete of a Singleton, to be honest, but Miller is still in a very good class as far as athletes in this running back class. So he is a good guy to have in this next year.
Yeah, the next player I actually had above Jamarian for a while, and then I was looking at things again today, preparing for the pod, and I really fell in love with Jamarian Miller. Like I really did, and so I ended up moving him ahead. I also kind of started worrying a little bit about Trevante Citizen's athleticism. I don't know that he's going to be an athletic back, and I don't believe that he had much of a receiving game either. And then you add in the fact that he's going to Miami. That's not exactly RBU, so I just wonder if it's going to be, if it's going to be this amazing thing where he ends up as a early second round pick in the NFL draft or anything like that. I feel like whether it might take a little bit longer for Miller to be justified at that pick, I still feel like Miller will be the better pick when it's all said and done, but maybe you can take advantage of trade values and stuff like that in the meantime. But how do you feel about Citizen? Did you end up, I'm guessing or thinking that you had him above Miller there?
Yeah, I had him just above there and same tier as you, all that. He was one that I've just been hearing I wouldn't even say consensus, but quite a few prominent analysts have him tier one. And I just don't quite see it. I definitely see a guy who's still developing as a running back, and he has a good frame, 6 foot, 217 pounds. So Trevante Citizen definitely could be a feature back. Like you said, maybe the landing spot isn't the best. He'll eventually get an opportunity there, and I think he'll make the most of it. But he seemed to lose a lot of momentum when he changed directions. And I thought he did improve on that a little bit, though, this senior year. So he was a bit more bursty, a little bit faster. He shows some development. So I'm not willing to say that this guy, I don't know. I'm still willing to say that he is a good back, to be honest. I do like him. And he ran track, but he wasn't really like this great sprinter at all. He was more in the mid-distance events, and that was kind of surprising to me. But that I won't rule him out as far as being maybe a 4 or 5 guy. But he certainly could be a bit slower than that. He hit 21 miles per hour in high school, but if he continues to bulk up, who knows? Because like you said, he's not really a burner. And I don't know, I could compare him to Kendall Milton in some ways. I think he plays somewhat similar to him. And, we've seen Milton for a couple different reasons struggle. Not saying that Trevante Citizen will, but he's not really a guy who I expect to take over as the RB1 right away when he steps on campus. So might take a bit of time with Citizen, but still very, very much a guy with upside.
It makes a lot of sense with that comp because I'm not a big Milton fan, so I'm also not the biggest Citizen fan. I might have even downplayed the receiving a little bit. Like he caught 15, or he had 15 receptions in 34 games in high school. In his senior season, now it was a shortened season. I'm guessing for injury. I don't know that to be a fact, but he had 2 receptions for 2 yards. So I don't think he's going to be a receiver, at the next level. And then throw in Miami and everything else that you said, and it's difficult for me to see him as a top tier guy. And at the very least. Now, obviously, I have him here at 4. I'm not saying he's bad by any means. I think he's a very good running back. I do have concerns. I have even more concerns than those top tier guys, and that's why I have him here in the second tier. And that's another reason why, like I said, I kind of fell in love with Miller, and I dropped Citizen a little bit more because it's like, man, he just has more question marks.
Right. He is a bit more of a projection, but at the same time, that upside is just so tantalizing. He's already at feature back size, and maybe just waiting 1 year and he's unleashed as the feature back there. It's still pretty tempting upside wise. So while I agree that he's in the second tier, he's a guy who could easily rise into that first, just once he proves it a little bit more on the college level.
Now, I will say, to be fair, he kind of is on that Braylon Allen trajectory, playing linebacker in high school. So maybe that's why the receiving game wasn't there. It doesn't mean necessarily that he can't do it, but we just haven't seen it really. And so, I'd like to see it before I do it. And that's tough with guys like this because you kind of have to project. But when people are putting him into tier 1 already, and I have these question marks, I'm fine letting people take him, and I'll go get the other guys. And that's kind of always been my way, whether it's Dynasty, Devy, or whatever else. And so, you take Citizen in tier 1. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to go ahead and get these other guys and possibly get them at a value. And that's just how I feel. And maybe I won't ever have any Citizen, but, I'll probably be okay with it too.
Yeah, and in 7-on-7 drills, I've seen some clips of him actually lining up as a receiver, practicing as a receiver, but it's just a totally different thing when you're out there in the game. Do NFL teams actually trust you to do that? Because we've seen guys like, I can't remember if it was like A.J. Dillon or somebody like that in some practices lining up outside like he's going to play receiver, but they're not really going to be deployed that way. So we'll have to wait and see with him.
Absolutely. Now, you said you had 2 more guys in this tier. I'm guessing or hoping that they're in my next tier here, but why don't you go ahead and give us your third guy there?
I have Andrew Paul, Georgia. So I have another Georgia running back. And
Wow.
yeah, and I can see from that reaction you're a bit surprised.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, I will say there's a very large tier that I have for tier four, which is where I have here Paul here, and I have five running backs in the tier. So like I guess I have him here at the bottom because of my love for Branson, but to your point, Georgia doesn't always just give the rock to one person, to one player, and so like there's no guarantee that's just going to be Branson. In fact, I would probably guarantee you that it's not just going to be Branson. So, what do you love about the guy?
Yeah, no, I mean, I love how much he rose his senior year. I just get giddy talking about this guy. And the ranking services are not going to accurately reflect to the level that he's developed. So, yeah, he's still a mid three-star recruit if you're going off the ranking services. But man, his senior year was dominant against uh, good Texas high school defenses. He had what, 2,000 plus rushing yards? No, no, what was it? 200 plus rushing yards per game. He had 41 rushing touchdowns as a senior. The guy was a beast, and he's hit that 21 miles per hour mark. So there's just no issues with his speed or burst, and he's elusive. He's juking guys, shaking them off, just outrunning everybody, and he uses his momentum well. So contact balance, able to drive the pile. And why we care about that is just because these guys are going to be able to churn out yards in the NFL too. They're not just you hit him and he falls down. So I think he could be an extremely good player. And I think that he could be like a Zach Evans type of guy. And we've seen Zach Evans, for example, not really get that huge volume, but we still love him as a prospect. And we've seen in the past Georgia be able to allocate carries and touches to these different backs. Like this year, we had Zamir White and James Cook both get pretty decent draft capital landing spots opportunities as far as we can anticipate. And they were not, nearly the prospects. Well, yeah, we can debate that later, but I'm just saying that those guys were not like these great prospects. So maybe some more talented guys like Paul, Branson Robinson could bring us back to the Sony Michel and Nick Chubb days when those two were in the backfield. Or maybe when DeAndre Swift was still getting touches when Sony Michel and Nick Chubb were still on the field. Like those types of things have happened all the time at Georgia, and it's kind of undeniable the amount of talent that they bring in. So it really resonated with me that Georgia went hard after this guy after he was doing these things his senior year.
Yeah, and I'm guessing his offense in high school didn't really throw to the running back all that often. Or if they did, they had a different receiving back. That part I definitely do not know. But when he did catch the ball, he did a lot with it. In his senior year, he averaged 14.9 yards per reception. Compared to some of these other guys that we've already talked about, we're getting like 7 or 8 yards per reception. And so, like, he only had 14 receptions in 13 games. It's not like he was this huge receiving back or anything. Like I said, I don't know if that's because of the offense or if there was a different running back in play, but he had 2,600 yards, so I don't know how many other running backs they could have possibly had, unless they were just running, nonstop. Not to mention the 41 touchdowns, like you already touched on. So I do like the player. I think maybe I had a little bit of Branson bias, so I lowered him down a little bit more, but I think you're kind of convincing me here with, it's Georgia. Like, there's definitely no guarantees that anyone's going to be that workhorse. And, like I said, if anything, we might even assume that they're not going to be.
Yeah, and I think just you use the word assume there. And I think oftentimes we assume, okay, Branson's the higher rated guy. He's the guy that Georgia was after for years. Well, that we shouldn't automatically assume that he is 100% better than Paul. He might be a little bit better as far as going back to his junior year of high school, but if Paul is peaking now, there's a chance that he could be better than Branson, honestly. And I know that's kind of crazy, but Andrew Paul is 5'11", 220. I mean, he's just as much of a workhorse size as Branson. He might not have the quads, right? He might not have that picture that Branson has handling the football in a tank top where he's just just buff and yeah. Anyways,
If he doesn't squat 620, I don't care. I just don't care.
right. We don't care. No, so I think Andrew Paul could certainly, it's in his possible outcomes for him to actually outproduce Branson. And we don't know what's going to happen injury wise. So I'm not going to bank on that, but we just need to know that great landing spot, great talent. I'm going to chase that. And you can get Paul pretty cheap. So even though I have him ranked at number 6 overall, doesn't mean I have to take him there. I could easily take him a little bit later in drafts and feel comfortable with that. So that's another thing I take into consideration when I am ranking these guys. Don't have to necessarily take them super early.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just like me, a lot of people are probably going to fall in love with Branson, and then you get Paul a little bit later, and like you said, maybe he ends up being the one when it's all said and done. Now, the player, like I said, it's a big tier, and I rank them, but I hate ranking them because honestly, I had a lot of difficulty doing that in this tier. But the next player, I feel like might be a little crazy. I don't I don't know how you feel about him, but there's a little bit of a bloodline there. There's a little bit of you got some SEC football going on. Trevor Etienne for me is my next player. I really do believe. I feel like a lot of people are assuming once again that Montrell Johnson is going to take over that job and just be the starter. But there's not that many other running backs in front. In front of Etienne. We have the bloodline with his brother, being what we're assuming is a great running back, and he's a 4-star prospect. He has good size. He showed receiving ability in his freshman season in high school. Things got a little dicey after that, but I mean, I feel like if you can show it in freshman year, then you can probably do it. And then I don't think it's impossible for him to see the field, even if he isn't like the true starter, and that's why I don't have him in like a top tier or anything. But how do you feel about Trevor Etienne here?
Yeah, so I like Trevor Etienne. I might not like him to the same extent that you do. I did have some questions about the speed, so I know he's related to Travis Etienne, but he doesn't necessarily have that same athleticism. So I don't know. I said I'd be surprised if he runs faster than a 4.5. You can still be a very viable back at 4.5, and he does have the size. So Etienne's in my next tier. He's in that tier 3. I do have him inside my top 20, but I'm not quite as high as you are. I just thought that his ceiling was potentially a bit limited. I
Sure.
didn't see him quite as dynamic as some of these other players when it's all said and done, but I mean, he can make a cut. He has a little bit of contact balance to his game, so I don't think that he's necessarily a plotter. And that system could be very nice as far as either deploying multiple running backs or promoting the most talented guy. So I think Etienne's probably more talented than some of the other backs there, but they have a lot of talent in Florida. To be honest, it's a little bit perplexing, like where some of these guys are going to fall. There's just that uncertainty. So I like that you can get Etienne pretty late in drafts, and like you said, he's a guy who has a lot of upside.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I feel like everyone's assuming or guaranteeing that Montreal Johnson's just going to take over, and like I like Johnson and what he did, but it was a small school. We don't know that it's fully going to translate. And I know there's some other players like what DeMarcus Bowman and maybe even I'm sure some other players, but I mean Bowman already transfer schools. He didn't do anything last year. Like at this point, we might just have to assume he's a bust. I think he was a 5-star prospect, but I mean. Come on, at what point, like, do you just go, okay, guys, like, dude can't even get on the field? Maybe it's off the field. I don't really know, but I don't know. It feels a little more open than some other backfields, and that's why I moved him up to the spot. But that doesn't, like I said, I'm not going to argue about any of these guys. Like if you say that the bottom tier guy, like Andrew Paul was the bottom of the tier. If you say he's the number one, I'm really not going to fight you on it.
Yeah, and that's fair. I do think that new coaching staff there, I'm not sure how much they have tied to ETN as far as, are they truly loyal to him? Or is he the guy that they want? I don't know. Montrell Johnson is the guy that the coaching staff wants because they followed right over to Florida. So I think that there's some ambiguity what the coaching staff thinks of all these backs. And so far, they've been pretty complimentary. I mean, I think positive praise out of most of the players in the spring from Florida, and ETN has not been there yet. He's not an early enrollee that I've seen, or if he was, nobody's been talking about him. So just maybe a bit of a slower learning curve, but I think eventually he could be a nice fit for the system. So I can mention my other guy. The only other guy I still have actually in my tier 2 is Emmanuel Henderson going to Alabama.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
6'1", 200 pounds. And I see that you're a little bit surprised there, but honestly, the fact that he's up to 200 pounds really makes it. Because if he's 185, it's a different story. So
that's all right. So I have him listed as 185. I looked at multiple reports and things trying to make sure that he hadn't gained weight since he enrolled or whatever, and all I saw was 185. So if you're seeing 200, that's a pretty big difference, because I have him all the way down at my tier 6. Throw in everything between Jahmyr Gibbs and some of these other players that were from in the 2024 class, and when is he going to see the field? We were just talking about Jamari Miller not possibly seeing the field for 2 or 3 years. So when the hell is Emmanuel Henderson going to see the field? And that's why I have him so much lower. But that doesn't mean. He is a very good prospect, but the size has really scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, and that's fair. And it could be one of those cases where we see reports. I can't remember if it was a camp report or what, and it's not officially updated on the sites from my last time I checked. So like you said, you're probably not finding that on ESPN, on 24/7, whatever sites you go to for size, but that's just what I heard. And that's very promising. So even if he's only like 190, 192, something like that, he still has that room to put on 15 pounds, get up to over 200, and he's going into that Bama system. So I think we had the same conversation last week when we were talking about some of the receivers at Alabama. And sometimes, even if you don't think he's the guy, like you're like, I like these other guys more, there's just a chance that Alabama is able to develop him, or maybe they really trust him. Something else happens injury wise. It's just such a great school at producing NFL talent. And we know this guy has good speed and burst, and he dominated. I know it was at a lower level of competition, a small school, but he was very good in high school. And he's not fully developed, but what better place to go to than Alabama to develop? He doesn't have to play right away, and he can get eased in. He can play returner, just get his feet wet. So I think that some of the competition is going to fade out of Alabama in the next 1 to 2 years. So there's potential that he could step up. Probably not this year, but maybe the next year. So I don't like him as much as our guy, Jamari Miller. But Henderson, again, similar to the Andrew Paul versus Branson Robinson, maybe Henderson's that same deal of, we don't have him quite as high, but he could always leapfrog Jamari Miller depending on how these collegiate careers play out.
Exactly. I like I said, I have him a lot lower, but I'm going to do a little more research on him and find out if he gained that weight, because that would make a huge difference. We've gone back and forth and talked in DMs about these guys just can't do it at 185, 190, and even if you give him that extra 15 pounds at 185, you're hoping for 200. Now, if he's already 200, it's a little different, and so that's when things will change. Now, we're kind of running out of time. This is my fault. I double booked the night. So let's run through a few more of our guys. I believe you're in tier 3. I'm in tier 4 over here. The rest of the guys in my tier 4 are Javonte Burns out of Oklahoma. Javonte Barnes out of Oklahoma. Justin Williams Thomas out of Tennessee. And Quinshawn or Quinshawn Judkins out of Ole Miss. That's the rest of my tier 4. How do you feel about those guys? And am I way off here?
Great names right there. I also have those guys in this range. Justin Williams was my next guy, actually. And at Tennessee, I think he's just that next feature back, or at least he has that opportunity, the size, the ability. I think we probably should consider George Pettaway, UNC, in there. I know he's a bit undersized. That's probably the biggest knock on him. But maybe he can become like a Michael Carter in that system. But then he also has another incoming back to compete against, Marion Hampton, UNC, who was very impressive. He's 6 foot, 215. He's actually one of the guys I'm much higher on than consensus, I guess. It's myself and think Felix Sharp and maybe one other guy in the community that still really likes Murray in Hampton, and that's because he wasn't clocked in at over 20 miles per hour, but he reportedly ran a 4.4. So, I mean, if he's a 4.4, or maybe let's just say like he's a high 4.5 guy at 215 pounds at UNC, there's not much competition there long term other than George Pettaway, who is undersized. So I think Hampton could be a stud there. Could be the next Javonte Williams coming out of that school. And honestly, he has some stylistic similarities, and he's super ripped. I mean, in 8th grade, he was deadlifting 585 pounds, I heard. If that's true, that's insane. He doesn't get the credit that he deserves, in my opinion. So I guess we could end with him. I really like Hampton out of UNC, at least compared to consensus.
Yeah, and with Pettaway, honestly, I really think it's just the size, once again. And maybe we're going to see a Michael Carter and Javonte Williams thing all over again with Pettaway and Amari in there, because, I do think that Pettaway is explosive. He has, he's a quality receiver. It's just going to be the size for me, and that's why I have him there. I have him in tier 5. Justin Williams, my biggest note on him was that the only 2 running backs that are really ahead of him right now are Jabari Small and Jalen Wright. And Jabari is my RB 50 overall, and Jalen Wright's my RB 67 overall. So I feel like there's not a lot of competition there. And so, with Justin Williams-Thomas, he definitely has the chance to be the guy now, or at least very soon. Javonte Barnes, I cannot find a lot of stats for him. For whatever reason, there's no stats for him out there. I checked multiple sites. I mean, I looked at everything, and there's really nothing. But he's 6 foot, 203 pounds already. And honestly, there's not a lot of competition. He could be the lead back as far as next year. 2023, not this season. But going forward, there's not a lot of competition. And everything I've seen scouting-wise, as far as film analysis and all that, says he has good vision, good receiving ability, and 4.5 speed. So, that's why I have him here in that tier 4. And then I still have no idea how Keenshawn Judkins, Ole Miss, not the greatest prospect, 3-star prospect, but he has decent size, 5'11", 200, great receiving profile, and honestly, once again, a chance to be the lead back in 2023. So you'll kind of notice a pattern there. These guys aren't going to be studs this year, I don't think. Maybe Justin Williams-Thomas, maybe, but give it a year, and all of a sudden people are going to be like, oh, this guy's stepping up, and you're already going to have him on your team.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And, I was talking about a couple UNC guys there, just to make sure. I want to try to get Amarian Hampton maybe in one draft this offseason. So to give the listeners a couple other names to kind of throw them off my scent. Jordan James, Oregon back. He has feature back size. Ramon Brown, Maryland. I know Austin, Debbie Dietz at Campus to Canton. He likes Ramon Brown.
Those are my next 2.
Okay, there you go. Le'Veon Moss, Texas A&M. I'm not the biggest fan of him. I think he's a little bit plodding, but he's the RB5 in the class for the composite and 24/7, and he's going to Texas A&M. So I think he's going to at least have some Devy value. I don't know. He might take the same routes as Isaiah Spiller, though, and not get good draft capital. So those are just some other names for people to consider.
Literally the next 3 players on my list. I'm not overly excited about any one of them, but I do think that, especially in a C2C league, they're players that you should have on your team. Probably not players that you should have on your Devy squad, but that's okay. They're players to keep in mind for the future. And like I said, if you're not a Devy player, these are players to keep in your mind, or just know their name for the future. When you go, wait a second, I remember on Devy Devotional they were talking about Ramon Brown, and so I'm going to draft him. I'm sorry for cutting this short. Maybe the last few names kind of felt rushed, and I apologize for that. But I hope you enjoyed the 2025 running back draft class talk. We're going to get into the QBs and the wide receivers in a couple weeks. We've done a lot of research on these players. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of projecting. But once again, we're doing this to help you, to help us. We have a C2C draft that we're going to be starting next week, and then we're actually going to be covering that, maybe not live. That would be kind of cool. We could do it live, but we're not going to be covering it live, but we will be covering it shortly after we do the draft. And I'm sure there's a lot that we can learn. You can learn. Everyone can learn from that draft. It's going to be an auction draft, and the fun part. I don't know how common this is, but we're actually drafting our campus side from the Canton side of the auction. So I don't know if I said that right, but it's going to be fun. We're going to choose our draft slot for the campus side from the Canton side. And so I definitely like that kind of, different way of doing it.
Yeah, no, I think it's been really cool. And to clarify on that a little bit too, for the people scratching their heads, like what? In the auction, we can nominate who wants the college 101 to draft from that slot. So, I mean, if you want the shot at, let's say, drafting a Bijan, drafting Travion Henderson, or whoever you have 101 on the college side, you might want to actually pay up. But the interesting part is, I mean, if you pay zero, you'll just end up with, maybe one of the later picks. You don't have to pay anything to just, grab the, 112
Exactly.
and 201 turn. So
there is some strategy involved, because you can just wait. You're guaranteed a pick. You're going to have a pick. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to miss out on a pick if I don't do this. So there's some strategy involved. You can go get your Bijan, or not Bijan, I'm sorry, but you can go get whoever, or you can go, get, you can just be like, hey, whatever, I'll go get this Canton side. I'll dominate on that side. And then, I'll end up with whoever. It's still a good class.
Yeah. I mean, you could easily end up with, Nicholas Singleton at 112 and, I don't know, probably not Gibbs, but somebody like Zach Evans maybe at 201 or something like that. Just have a powerhouse of running backs. So it will be very interesting to share that with the listeners here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us once again. I love the new rotation we're doing with the Monocle next week, and then Devy Devotional in 2 weeks. If we can stick to that'll at least through the off season. That's awesome. I know it's a lot of work for Aaron. He's very busy. I'm very busy, but it's a lot of fun. We enjoy it. I have to get going. I have another pod starting right now, so we're going to go ahead and get out of here. But we will see you next time with the QBs and the wide receivers. See you guys.